Welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm dedicated to helping you take control of your life. Together, we'll explore practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Making small changes is possible and can lead to big results. Are you ready? Let's go do this. All right, Mike O'Connor, welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. How are you today, man?
Doing great, Sue. Thanks for having me. I'm
Hey.
excited.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So, Mike, take a couple of minutes and just talk about who you are so people get a flavor, and then we are going to jump from there.
I love it. So Mike O'Connor, I live down in the 30A region of the Panhandle in Florida, married with 2 kids. Kind of have a traditional background at first, kind of doing the whole, high school, college, corporate job out of school and thinking that was the American dream and what I was looking to do. So came out of school from the University of Georgia back in 2011, worked for some big consulting firms, did the whole jet setting around, although, wearing the suits on client sites, thinking it was awesome, and kind of jumped from job to job to job and kept finding a lack of satisfaction and fulfillment in what I was doing. And that eventually has led me into this entrepreneurial world that I'm sure we're going to dive in deeply into today. Started off in real estate, moved to, scaling some businesses, had a lot of wins, had a lot of losses, had some more wins. And so excited to kind of dive into all that with you.
All right. So wins are easy for people. It's like, yeah, got that win. So you just mentioned about some losses too. So do you want to talk about how the wins and losses have played out in your life?
100%. Yeah. I'll kind of preface this whole thing with, if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to scale and grow, or really doing anything in life, and you're kind of pushing the boundaries and pushing the limits, you're not pushing hard enough if you don't swing and miss sometimes, right? And now you need to get smarter. You need to get educated and learn from your mistakes, and ideally learn from others' mistakes. That's even better. But if you're not pushing up against the boundaries, you're not going to have some of these failures. So kind of looking back into my entrepreneurial journey, I started off investing in real estate back in 2013. So we found a phenomenal time to start buying assets. We were doing the mid-sized multifamilies. At that time, it was kind of hard to miss, right? The market just kept going up and up and up. And so we had a lot of fortune. Now, that said, when we were jumping into that, people thought we were crazy, going and buying kind of distressed C-class assets when the market was just kind of turning back around. But we were crazy enough to jump into that. And we had a lot of success in both the assets, but then also parlaying that into ancillary businesses. So we created a brokerage out of it, a property management company, construction, landscaping, right? We kind of looked at everything that we were touching in the sphere of influence that we had, specifically within the Atlanta real estate market at the time, and kind of took advantage of that. So we had a phenomenal run throughout the 2010s and just had a lot of success, scaled the businesses, had a lot of growth, and, things were good. We got a little ahead of our skis after that, right? Because we were having so much good fortune and having so much luck and scaling and growing that we started kind of spreading our seeds out a little bit, right? So we started investing in things that we really didn't have much knowledge in or much control. We were kind of biting off more than we can chew. So, we invested in a concrete franchise concept. Instead of buying 1 territory, we bought 3. We invested in oil change facility concept. Instead of buying 1 or 0, because we know nothing about oil changes, we bought 10 territories, right?
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Yeah, boy, you guys go big. You don't start small, do you?
If anything, if you're going to do something, you might as well do it big.
Yeah, right. Were you fearless back then? I'm sorry, I mean to interrupt you, but were you like, that seems like fearless is the first word that comes to my mind. Like, not to do just 1, but to do 3 or to do 10.
If I'm being completely honest with myself, cocky's not the right word, but we weren't missing, right? So we were taking some big swings. We bought a manufacturing business right at the beginning of COVID that was taking off during COVID because of all the COVID factors, right? And so we had success buying some things outside of our lane that were working, and the businesses were doing great. So when COVID first happened, right, that's when, some of these troubles kind of happened like 2001 or 2021, right? So it's pretty fresh in my mind, right? COVID happened. We thought we were going to have this really, bad, chain of events, and we were kind of buckling up for disaster, when in reality, everything just kind of kept going up and up and up and up. Money was flooding the system. Money was cheap. Business was happening. It's the COVID tail that we weren't really anticipating. Things got oversupplied, oversaturated. Money was so cheap, then money started getting expensive. Inventory was out in the market. And so it made things a little challenging. We, looking back, right, wrapped up the oil change facilities, wrapped up the concrete companies, a lot of the other businesses that were struggling, that we were trying to scale and grow. we've kind of brought down and stabilized at a lower kind of top line number and focus more on bottom line profitability. So it was a good learning curve not to get ahead of your skis and really focus on what you know, and don't have the parameters out too wide, right? Really hone in on what you're good at. That's where I think you can really kind of, make a lot of money, is focusing on, a couple of one things.
Yeah, you mentioned getting ahead of your skis. How did you get ahead of your skis, and then what did you learn from it?
I'd say getting ahead of my skis kind of in two or three aspects. One, getting into industries that we know nothing about, right? The oil change industry, there's a lot of big private equity companies. Driven Brands is backing Take 5, which you see those little quick oil lube change places all over the place. They know what they're doing. They got huge capital spend behind them to throw resources at it, right? We didn't. We worked with an emerging brand. We knew nothing about it. So getting ahead of your skis in that sense. Biting off more than you can chew at one point in time. To really scale something and to scale it properly, you need to pour time, energy, and effort into it, and money. And so if you're trying to launch 3 or 4 things at one time, nothing's going to get your full attention, and everything's just going to be average at best, right? And so that was a big learning lesson. And then to your thing about going big, probably should have started off trying 1, 2, and then seeing how it went and go from there. The problems would be less. We're still working to unwind 15-year leases that we got ourselves into for a couple of these spots, right?
Wow.
The problems persist. The checks continue to come even though we're shutting them down. So if I were to give anyone any advice, people get this like shiny toy syndrome, especially once you start having some success. Continue to laser in on what you're good at and think about, what the highest and best use of your time, energy, and effort is, right? And oftentimes it's what's right in front of you and just expanding what you have.
That's a good point. Just looking at where you have how often we get that shiny object syndrome. And
Yeah.
sometimes shiny objects are good. I don't knock shiny objects. I say, you know what, they're good if they're low risk, to give you an idea whether or not that's the thing that you want to pursue. But as you said, find the thing that you're really good at and then stick to it in that lane. What was one thing that you thought would be hard about scaling businesses, and it turns out it wasn't? And then flip it. What did you think would be easy and then wound up being more challenging for you?
So the actual growth itself, you always think would be hard. It's intimidating. I'm starting this business. I don't want to grow, right? And so the sales aspect has actually always come easy to me, which is what that kind of what that is. But when you're going into a new venture, it's very intimidating to start something from scratch. When we started our property management business, man, how are we going to get doors? How are we going to get clients? That was never the problem. Starting Nexus Point right now, it's an outsourcing business that I run, a small, medium-sized business, back office, virtual assistants, and things like that. I was so worried about sales and getting a pipeline. Sales are nowhere near the problem, right? They're just coming through the front door. So that would be the first thing. And the reason is I love selling. So it's something that I'm passionate about. So it's easy for me to pour my energy into. And I'm focused on it, right? The thing that I would say is hardest is I'm a people person. I've always related well to people, but finding good quality talent that's going to invest their time into helping you grow and scale is way harder than anyone would ever imagine, right? People are complicated. People are nuanced. People can be wild cards sometimes. So managing people, having them represent your brand and you the right way is way harder than it looks like on the surface.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess so. So out of that, then you talked about finding good people. So there's a mindset component to that. Yes. So
100%.
yeah. So talk a little bit about that and what that looks like as you're looking for people.
So you've got to, people naturally attract themselves to people that are very similar to them, right? Like people that you enjoy talking with, that have the same personality. While sometimes that's a good thing, you got to keep in mind that you've got to look for people who have complementary skill sets to you, right? So find a little bit of friction. I've always said in business partnerships that I'm in, if we're not having what I call healthy fighting, right? Not like, not like toxic fight, but if we're not, that comes back to the whole pushing the boundaries thing, right? If you're not butting up against each other and having arguments and disagreements, you're not pushing the boundaries and you're creating an echo chamber. So when I'm hiring people or looking for partners, I think it's extremely important to find people that are a little frictional with you, that aren't, your same person, that complement your skill sets very well. So I love to talk. I love to sell, right? Have another person who knows to talk and sell would not be good for me, right? So my business partner now at Nexus Point, he's perfectly capable of selling. He is phenomenal operationally. He loves getting into the weeds. He's very detail oriented. And so we've got a really good yin and yang going on there. And so that's been a really good lesson that I've learned.
Yeah, how about out of your own personal life? So you talked a little bit about having successes and failures. I don't think we really touched too much on that. Would you care to share something that was a learning experience for you? I hate to use the word failure, that something that was a learning experience for you out of anything that you've done and what you learned out of that.
In my personal life.
It doesn't matter.
So let's see. I think the big thing probably was, and I don't regret doing this, but going the corporate route, right? Society and people, like we need people in these corporate jobs for our society and our economy to run. But for me, it wasn't the right thing. My entire life, I struggled with structure. I struggled with authority, right? I was the kid that was causing trouble, getting suspended, getting in fights in my hockey games, like, just a little bit off the chain. And I've since honed that in, of course. Um, but the whole American dream is you go to high school, you go to college, you get a degree, you get a corporate job, you work your way up, invest in your 401k. And that's not me at all. And so I tried to fight that battle for 5 or 6 years. And I finally realized that this won't work for me long term. I used to get the Sunday scaries where, I wake up Sunday morning, by about lunchtime, I'd be like, oh man, tomorrow's Monday. I got to hop on the train and go into the client site. And so a lesson learned for me from that is like, listen to your gut, right? At that time when I was making this decision to jump, I was like 26 years old, and I was so worried. Like, you've got everything to lose, nothing to lose at 26, right? You could go and reinvent yourself 5 or 6 times over. So kind of listening to your gut, realize really where you are in the life cycle, right? I think if you look outward in today's day and age, and so especially with social media and the way that people are portraying themselves, are only highlighting the wins and how awesome they're doing. And you see these young folks making millions of bucks. There's a lot more below the surface to that, and people need to realize that. So kind of step back, focus on yourself, listen to what really is important to you, and then pursue that passion. You'll have way more success than you'd ever imagine. That's my opinion.
What was below the surface for you when you decided to make that jump at 26?
In what sense?
Like, were you afraid to do that? What did you jump to? How did you know
Yeah,
where to jump?
it was intimidating, right? And so I was kind of building a little bit of runway out at the time. So I was investing in real estate, and I was starting to manage some properties kind of off the side of my desk. And I realized, hey, there's some momentum here, and there's a lot of things that I can do with this. So I got licensed as a broker, right? We were running the property management company. We had the real estate assets. So we had this runway, and I was viewing it as kind of like this little passive side thing. And then when I kind of looked at, I love spending all my time over here, right? I was quickly shifting my mind from I used to be the guy who jump in and help with sales pursuits for my clients and, like doing extra work above and beyond my job. Well, I started shifting my focus in that spare time to my side hustles. And I realized I'm liking it more. The potential to make money is there more. And I've got something that I can create. And so I remember looking back and saying, all right, how much of a runway I have? If I pull the plug on this, how long can I go without making any money? Can I go a year without making money? Can I go 2 years? And the answer was yes. I was frugal. I
Yeah.
was saving cash. I fortunately had a spouse who worked, right? There's a lot of factors that played to my advantage. And so I finally, one day, my boss came in and said, hey, it's time to do your mid-year review. I said, I actually have to talk to you. It was literally off like knee jerk. And I quit that day.
Wow.
Um, and I haven't looked back. So I remember the decision was a little scary, but once you really put it in perspective as like what's really at risk,
Yeah.
it's nothing, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. You mentioned it was gonna be scary. How often do we think of things that are scary, but what we fear doesn't really happen anyway? So the
that's
fact you had
that's
the
correct.
runway. Yeah.
Now, I'm not naive to the fact that if I was a parent, the only sole
Oh,
breadwinner
sure.
with 2 kids, like the situation would have been a little different.
Yeah, yeah, sure. That's what the runway is for, right? The runway is to
Correct.
try there to mitigate some of the fears that you might have. So you had 2 years, you had a spouse who worked.
Yep.
I'm assuming you didn't have any kids at the time. You were
Nope.
26. Yeah. So you had a lot of factors that allowed you to take a bigger risk versus somebody who's mid 30s. You've got 3 kids, you got a mortgage payment, you got a wife who
Yep.
works part-time or whatever, nothing in
Correct.
savings, things like that. Yeah. So it's really important to be honest, be brutally honest with yourself and evaluate what it
That's right.
is that you're going to jump into. Now,
Yep.
as you started pursuing your side hustle and you saw that growing and that was something that made you excited, did you have people to help you along the way on that side of your journey?
Yeah, so I had a business partner. I've always really
Okay.
thrived in a situation where I'm like 50-50 with someone because I love bouncing ideas. I love, that kind of healthy friction and conflict. It really helps me confirm that I'm heading down the right path. So I had a business partner. We actually started our careers in the same spot. So he was in like a similar phase as me. And it was really funny just watching us do it. We had these full-time jobs. We were like trying to like, manage real estate and buy real estate. We were going out for lunch from our desk. Like it was kind of hectic, but we were both in the same boat together, and we were kind of, helping each other kind of row the boat. So it was very helpful.
Did he jump too at the same time you jumped?
He jumped a year later. And what's really funny,
Wow.
Sue, is he was intimidated for the same reason. And then he saw, again, very fortunate, like the year I left my job, I doubled my income that first year and then quadrupled it the next year. Right. And so he saw like, oh man, like what am I doing here? Because I was laser focused on it. Right. There was the management, there was the brokerage side of things. We had not at that point started landscape or construction, but I was, I had a huge client base. Things were just rocking. And he's like, oh man, I can really do this. He then pulled the plug. First year out, doubled his income, quadrupled his
wow.
income.
Yeah.
So
Glad he did that. What are some things that you learned from partnerships that from having a partner versus being a solopreneur and doing this on your own?
yeah, so I've never been a solopreneur, so I can't speak to that. But from learning from a partnership, it's like being married to someone, right? Like we always laugh, like this is my business wife, And so you're gonna have conflict. You're gonna get frustrated. There's gonna be times where you feel like you're pulling more of the weight, and they feel like they're pulling more of the weight. So you got to have open lines of communication. Eat the frog. Never sit on any type of conflict or assume that they're thinking one thing. You've got to be able to have open and direct dialogue and communication. What I found is having that kind of upfront. So my business partner that I work with now on Nexus Point, we both had business partners in the past. We've each sold our ventures and that and are now working together. And we kind of knew what worked well and what didn't work well. So at the very beginning, I was like, hey, here's how I communicate. Like when I'm frustrated, I do this. Here are my weaknesses. Here are my strengths.
Oh, wow.
Like
Okay.
call me out when you see it. My business partner is really good about being very direct to the point where some people might be like caught off guard. And I'd say, and he'll be like, oh, sorry, I was too direct. No, Brandon, like I need you to be as direct as humanly possible because that's just that's your role within the business, right? And so as long as you understand each other and where you're coming from and have a healthy level of respect for one another, that's the ticket to a good partnership.
Do you think you also need a high level of trust in that person too, that as they're looking at you and
100%.
evaluating you? Yeah. Because if you don't have that trust factor, then I would imagine it's more difficult to operate authentically as business partners in a business partnership. Yeah.
The way I look at it is you always need to assume that this person is doing something with both your best interests in mind. Now, sometimes in a partnership, someone does something that hurts the other one. And it's as long as it's not on purpose or an
Intentional,
accident.
right?
Again, you're only in your own head sometimes and you're doing your thing. But I've always worked with people I have a high level of trust with. My other partner and I would, wire each other back, 6 figures at a time with no promissory notes. Hey man, like, can you spot me this for 2 weeks? Oh, sure, man. Like, where do you want me to send it? Right. So a really high level of trust.
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. You have to trust the person on the other end
Correct.
and say, yeah, okay, I know you are going to say what you said you're going to do.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah,
So it's
absolutely.
important.
What's something that very few people agree with you on?
That's a really good question. I think just in general, I believe in kind of like counter thinking, right? So if everyone's running this way, I tend to run that way. And so it's hard for me to kind of pull out one specific thing. The conflict thing, I think is one, right? People always think about, oh, it needs to be kumbaya and symbiotics. Like, no, I want some scrappy fighting. Like I want to kind of battle. And then if I see a bunch of people going in one direction, my brain automatically thinks like, okay, that's groupthink. Something is off there. Let me go the other direction. So I'm kind of skirting the question a little bit in the sense that I don't have any like hyper aggressive like counter views on things, but I do tend to flip things on their head and say, if I see 10 people doing that exact same thing, opportunity is in the other direction in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that makes I like that. I like that. The group think where you really think about that, it's like, oh wow, does everybody really know or are they just following something else?
Well, you've
And
been in that
yeah,
situation 1,000 times where you're not
sure.
quite sure. A couple of people that you hold in high regard or saying something like, "Oh, that must be what we're doing." Well,
Right.
in today's day and age where people are afraid about direct communication because the world's just a little more sensitive these days, groupthink is this like really dangerous thing. There's echo chambers all over the place. And so
Sure.
something in our current business, we tell our team is like, I get that I'm the founder and the owner. if I'm saying something that you disagree with, I want you to call me out right now. Do not feel like you will never get in trouble for um, respectfully disagreeing with me. You can do it in front of a bunch of
Mhm.
people. You can do it one-on-one. But if you're just going to be an echo chamber, then what's the point in having people around? Because we'll all
Sure.
just be,
Or I'll
herd
just be
mentality.
doing the same thing. Yeah, that
Exactly.
makes sense too. So so for somebody listening and they're going like, "Well, I don't like conflict. I don't like to disagree with somebody because it starts creating this conflict." How would you answer or encourage them to say, "Wait a minute, that," and we've been talking about that too. The conflict is a good thing. What are some good things that you've seen come out of healthy conflict?
Yeah. So first off, if you don't like conflict, solopreneur and being like a single business partner might be your best thing. Some of the best things in my life have come from conflict, right?
Give an example.
For example, personal. I'll go on the personal life, right? Like my wife and I had recently hired an au pair, right? And we had different agreements on what we were looking for in this person. And like through dialogue and back and forth, like I saw things from her perspective, she thought things from my perspective. We found the perfect person. The way that I'm scaling and growing Nexus Point right now with my business partner, we come from very different points of view. I've been in this experience before where I have overhired before. So I'm approaching it from very conservative, like hire our next move, our next people from a very conservative standpoint. He has experience running a similar business like we're running now, a monthly recurring revenue business, and I don't. And so he's really good at saying, Mike, no, I get where you're coming from with overhiring, but I've seen this before, and here's the trajections, and here's why we need to do this, right? And so for me, it's like, okay, like that shed light. I've never experienced what he's seen there, and he knows where we're going in this particular situation. And so we have some conflict over that hiring. And I realized I was having a scarcity mindset with that, and that if we didn't hire, lo and behold, 2 months later, we'd be way behind the 8 ball, and we'd be kind of hurting ourselves. So a couple of relevant examples.
Yeah, that sounds like the yin yang you were talking about before, where
Yeah.
he has his strengths and you have you recognize weaknesses and vice versa, I'm sure as
And
well.
that's a
Yeah.
big thing that you just hit on, Sue. If you're gonna be open to healthy conflict, you need to put your ego aside and be
Mhm.
willing to admit sometimes the other person's right, or it's a blend of the two, and say, "Oh, you know what? You're right. I was wrong." Right, and that's okay. Right? You're not going to be right 100% of the time. If you
Yeah.
were, you'd be a billionaire.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing I hear you saying too is that you need to have a high level of self-awareness. You need to know yourself
Bingo.
as well before you can even go in and interact with other people. So you need to know what your strengths are. You need to know what your weaknesses are. What are some things that you've done to make those more conscious? And the reason I say that is because a lot of times we have that unconscious conscious, I think it's called, where we have our strengths and weaknesses, but we don't really realize that they're strengths and weaknesses, right? So we need to bring them, bubble them to the surface. What are some things that you've done for yourself to help yourself and your partners as well?
I think I've always been a pretty self-aware person, and I think being willing to be vulnerable and like putting your ego aside, you also, it sounds kind of counterintuitive. You also have to have a high level of confidence in yourself, right? So like putting your ego aside, but at the same time being highly confident. If you're comfortable with who you are, right? Um, you'll be okay being wrong. You'll be okay not being the smartest person in the room
Mm.
sometime, right? And so I think it's a really a matter of like mindset and kind of perspective changing, right? So if you're going into a room, like a Go Abundance type room where there's people from all different walks of life but great experiences, and you're going in there to, talk at people and pass along your point of view, well, you're really not going to make much progress, right? If you're going in there with your ego aside, listening, providing experience share, and really opening yourself up to learning, that's where you really unlock a lot of the value. So, I constantly am working on just putting my ego aside, putting myself in other people's shoes where it's like, I think I was right here. Like, what are they complaining about? And kind of step back and really saying, like, where could I have, offended them, or where could I have walked wrong? And then asking them, like, hey, like, I think I might have been a little over the top there. Like, this is where I was coming from. I'd love to hear your perspective. So asking questions of other people, where they're coming
Mhm.
from, understanding their motives, values, and all that is really helpful. So kind of hit on earlier, it comes back to communication and willing to be vulnerable, and simultaneously having a high level of confidence in who you are. So I know it's kind of a mixed bag of things, but
Yeah, no, it's all good. You mentioned ego a couple of times. How do you define ego?
There's a lot of different ways that I define ego, right? There's the kind of negative connotation of people who are all about themselves, focus on themselves. Look what I've done. Look at my assets. Look at, my status, right? And that's kind of a negative ego. There's the other side of ego that I think about where it's just like you just truly kind of understand who you are, what your strengths are, and what your weaknesses are. And it comes across in a really calm, confident way, right? Now, I've got a stat, this kind of goes against my conflict and butting up against things. I always say if to be truly confident, you need to cross the line into cocky sometimes. I know that sounds a little crazy, but being confident drives a lot of positive actions, right? When you're feeling confident, if you're feeling motivated, if you're feeling secure, you'll take good action. And sometimes that comes across as being cocky. So I think that's an important thing too, but recognizing when you cross the line and pulling it back. But kind of back to the core of your question, ego is really understanding who you are. And then there's the negative connotation of being outwardly flamboyant or boisterous, which is what you want to avoid.
Oh, okay. I've heard it also defined the ego as that small voice in you trying to keep you safe from doing
Interesting.
something that you shouldn't do. Yeah, I had a business coach on a couple weeks ago. We had an interview. I'm not sure where his interview is coming out with your interview, but anyway, he defined ego is that small voice inside of you that tries to keep you safe right where you are.
Interesting.
And
That's fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, I didn't know it either, and we actually got into this big discussion of what ego meant, because I always used to think of it the way you described one of them as the negative connotations, like, oh, he has a massive ego. And when you think about having a massive ego, you can also have a massive ego that massively protects you, that keeps you from taking action.
Huh.
So
That's an
it's
interesting way to look at it.
very interesting. I know, I know. Well, I'm gonna get a little vulnerable here. My coach told me a few times, he's like, "Sue, you have a massive ego." And I didn't press in, and I didn't quite press into him because I
Yeah.
don't know why. There was just some reasons, or maybe I was just processing the comment. But after I heard that massive ego, that ego is trying to protect you, then I understood what he meant when I took that definition and put it against what he said to me. It's like, oh, so my massive ego is keeping me from making decisions that I'm not making out of fear.
Yeah. Huh. I
And
gotta process that
so
one. That's
now
interesting.
now I have to move forward and instead say, "Thank you, little ego. Thank you for protecting me. You got me this far, but I don't need you anymore. This is my new version of me. I can continue forward, and, I'm gonna be okay."
I love
Be
that.
because I've always been okay.
Right.
Isn't it funny how we create situations in our mind and we play them out, and it turns out they never happen anyway?
Exactly. The best case scenario and worst case scenario rarely things kind of play in the middle a little bit. So the waking up at 2:30 in the morning fretting about that thing that may or may not happen, it's just not worth it. You got to put that stuff aside.
Yeah. What do you do for yourself if that happens to you? If you find yourself going to that place, and because I'm sure you run a lot of businesses, you have partners, you have shit hit the fan from time to time. What do you do for yourself to help yourself not stay there too long?
Yeah, there's simple things. So I like to write things down and get it on paper because then it gets it out of my mind, right? And that helps me just kind of process things. And then I think kind of the physical well-being really leads well to the good mental well-being, where you can just kind of be calm. And so there's a lot of little things. Yeah, working out, 3 or 4 times, if not more, a week. I'm big on doing cold therapy. I'm big on doing like red light saunas. There's some great breath work classes that I've done through my health coach lately. So I think taking care of yourself, eating right, doing some fasting has helped my mental health. And I would say mental health, but just ability to kind of not go off the rails one way or the other a
Mhm.
lot. Just a lot more focused, a lot more kind of static. And then putting yourself in the shoes of, okay, how many times have I seen this kind of situation before where I thought I was going to blow up? And then what truly could be the worst case scenario, right? Are my kids okay? Are they healthy? Do I have a roof over my head? Am I eating? Do I have a car to get to and from? Like, if you think about it, your worst case scenario is most people's best case scenario, right? And
Yeah,
so when you kind
good
of put it in
point.
perspective, like, what am I worried about? This client issue for, or this employee issue for? Like, it will work itself out. They always do. So kind of stepping back and thinking big picture as well is important.
I like that. If you could go back in time to your younger self and, deliver yourself a message, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I'd say pursue your dreams and think big, right? There was a moment of time, like from college to the first 5 years out of school, where I kind of dropped that. I was the kid who was selling lemonade. I was the kid who was selling burned CDs in the hallway at school. I had dreams of being a professional athlete, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to be this like super wealthy business guy one day. And then I kind of got to college and fell into that kind of rut where everyone joins a fraternity, does the same thing. And then joins this corporate world. So it wasn't a bad period of life. It was a very
Right.
good period of life, but it definitely was me straying away from my passion, right? I used to be a huge thinker when I was younger. I'm a huge thinker now. And there's this period of time where I kind of let it go and was just doing the mum drum. Everyone goes in 9 to 5, doing your job. So, keep your head up and continue to think big. Kids are fascinating, right? Because they don't have these like societal norms placed on them. And so they're willing to have these like, I don't want to say fantasies, but these big thoughts and these big dreams, and those are attainable. Like there's no reason that we as adults need to stop thinking that way. So continuing that mindset and keeping that, let's just call it immaturity in you in a way, right? Where you can
Yeah,
think
I
that
like it. No,
and
I
have these
like
big
that.
thoughts. So
I like that. Stay a little kid on the inside and then feed that. And there's nothing wrong with that. How often were we told when we were younger, well, just grow up. You just have to grow up, stop being a kid, don't
right,
act like a kid and stuff. But really that's what's the driver behind creativity is when you keep that open mind and you kind of stay as a small child and stay curious.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. Stay curious and just, enjoy that. Yeah, it's hard. When you ask the question if you could go back in time to your younger self, actually, when you look at it, everything in our lives play out exactly as they should to bring
Right.
us to the moment that we're at now.
Yeah,
So,
I'm very happy with where I'm at. So like
yeah.
that's an interesting question. I'm kind of happy on how I got here, right? Like I might have made some less boneheaded decisions when I was in high school, like, don't get suspended
Yeah,
for
all
this
of
or don't do
us.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, but you know what?
but
That was who you are at your core, if you think about it, because that confrontation that you had in your younger years actually as you matured, it allowed you to see and develop to have healthy confrontation with your peers, your partners as you
yeah,
got older. So I think there's just the confrontation's not bad at a younger age. It's just it's paired with immaturity, so you
yep,
don't know how to harness it in a way that's productive. So as you get older, the skill is to take the confrontation and add maturity to it
yeah, bingo.
so that it becomes productive.
Yeah, well said. I agree.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I'm thinking about my own situation that I'm getting ready to walk into, and I'm like, okay, I tend to be a people pleaser. I tend to say yes all the time, and the conflict occurs in my head and doesn't get out of my mouth. So there's a skill that I need to learn there to just,
Yeah, and then it's
be able to
festering and building
res-
up inside
yeah,
of you.
do you think that healthy conflict is like a muscle? Once you do the first time you do it, it's awkward. The second
Yes.
time, it gets a little less awkward, and then
Yeah, because you get better at communicating it, right? So like I have
Mhm.
a lot of healthy conflict now, and I let people know ahead of time, hey, within this situation or role, I'm going to push, and I'm expecting you to push on me. So if I'm having a very direct conversation with you that comes across as perhaps negative, know that it's not. It's in the effort of growth and moving forward. Whereas
Sure.
when you're new to it, right? Like you're intimidated to maybe say the words, you spew it out, and it comes across like very poorly. It catches people off guard. So you kind of learn how to do it the right way, and as you work with people too, you learn how they receive it and provide it, right? So you know
Mhm.
how to deliver some of that conflict. I think it's essential.
Yeah. What are some communication tools that you use
Yeah,
and
I
honed?
value direct communication and letting people know like this is where I'm coming from. So it's like before, like let's just continue on the path of the challenging conversations with the direct communication. Before we ever get to that, hey guys, this is how I communicate. I will be, you'll see me level headed, 9 out of 10 times. Here's where I, sometimes have a weak spot where I'll kind of lose my cool. So please keep me accountable here. It comes back to understanding what your shortcomings and your strengths are, right? And communicating those outwards. So as long as you can kind of set the stage, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
for how you want to communicate and how you plan to communicate, then when it happens, it's all part of kind of what everyone's expectations are. So expectations are key for just about anything in life, including how you communicate with people.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, set the expectation. I like that. Do you have like a written set of expectations that you give to people, or is that just something that you say, "Hey, this is what to expect outright"?
It's situational, right? So I
Yeah,
don't really have a
yeah.
good answer for that because the way that I communicate with Brand and my business partner is different than how I'm going to communicate with my
Oh,
wife.
sure.
It's
It's a
different
good
than how I'm
point.
going to communicate with my kids. And so it's, it's kind of playing it, time by time. And then sometimes like the healthy conflict's good in a lot of situations. And sometimes it's best just to let some things go, right? And you got to use a little bit of judgment. But to your point, like if things are bubbling up inside of you, well, something really small might become really big because it's compiling on something else, right? You never got anything else. All of a sudden, 10 little things feel like this massive issue or situation. So just getting it out there is the best way to do it. And it helps other people too, because they may not realize that they're causing a problem, or you might not realize that you're causing a problem.
Sure.
Or you're in this echo chamber, which is the worst thing that could ever happen when you're just kind of staying stagnant, not making, the best progress forward.
Sure. I would say good questioning in there too
Yeah.
before you come to assumptions or conclusions would also be helpful. I know I sometimes fall short in that. It's
Yeah.
hard. Sometimes it's hard to not make an assumption or to have a thought that you didn't think was an assumption, but it really was an assumption.
You
That's the hard part. It's figuring out, oh, I assumed that thing and I didn't
know,
realize that that was an assumption.
Well, and the other really important thing to that too, if you're going to have direct feedback, we've been talking more on kind of like the challenging, healthy conflict side. Direct
Sure.
feedback in a positive way is important too. And what I've really learned is with especially people on my team, and like even with like your kids, right? It's like giving very vague feedback is not helpful. Hey, you've been doing a great job lately. I really appreciate you. If you say, hey, you did a phenomenal job when you were solving that client issue X, Y, and Z because you did this and the outcome was this, and I just wanted to commend you on how well you did there. So like, thank you for your efforts. So like having that very direct, specific, positive conversations are equally as important.
Yeah, specificity. How
Specificity is
m
key.
yeah, how much conflict would we really avoid if we were just specific on what we were asking or what we wanted or what we
Almost
were looking for?
almost every bit,
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
uh,
So, Mike, in all my podcasts, I ask everybody pretty much the same 3 questions. Are you ready for those?
let's go.
All right. So the first is, please share a book or resource that's had a significant impact on you.
So Titan, John Rockefeller's biography. So it's about this thick. If you stand on it, you'd be 3 inches taller. But he was a phenomenal, businessman. He was a billionaire before the world knew what a billionaire was. And if you look
Mhm.
at his business, he was a quirky guy, by the way. But he was vertically integrated from the land that he owned, the land he drilled, the machines he used, the oil in the ground, the railways that carried it, the candles that the oil went into, and kind of everything in between. And so if you just look at someone who was pushing the boundaries and seizing opportunity within his own kind of ecosystem and growing on it, it's fascinating.
What was one thing in his life that really inspired you?
I think it's kind of that thinking big, right? You don't accomplish these things without thinking big. He was also a very disciplined individual, like down to the penny on certain things. Um, and another interesting thing, not really inspirational, but it's interesting. Everyone thinks that in order to be successful, you have to work these 18-hour days. Well, John Rockefeller would take naps every afternoon, right? He was a big thing. He'd work hard, he'd recharge his brain by taking a nap and get back after it. And so it kind of puts an interesting perspective on kind of what hard
Yeah.
work is.
Well, he wasn't on Facebook either. You know,
That's
how
true.
much of us could take that 20-minute nap if we didn't scroll for 20 minutes on Facebook?
That's correct.
So,
Yes.
yeah, you go back there, it's like, "Oh, right, they didn't have all the technology and a lot they didn't have electricity at night." The
Right.
sun went down, you get a candle, maybe
Maybe read a book. Yeah.
yeah, you read a book, and that's about it. What is one question or topic you wish I would have asked about, and how would you have answered the question or expanded on the topic?
That's a really good question too. This will kind of come back to just where I'm at with my business right now, kind of my viewpoint on like staffing and hiring, right? So I think that COVID has drastically changed. So the question would have been, how do you view the workforce in the
Oh, yeah.
United States, and how can businesses scale more efficiently? So I'm going to bring it to what I'm doing now, why I'm doing it. If you look at what COVID has done to the remote workforce, all these people who want to work remote in these kind of entry-level back office operational jobs, I think that you're going to see the ecosystem of our workforce dramatically shifting over the next 10 years. You and I are in two completely different states talking face to face right now, right? Remote work is happening all the time. People want to work from home. So who cares if you're working from home in Atlanta or Dallas or Miami or the Philippines or Brazil or some of these other areas? So I think you're going to see this world become ever, more interconnected. I think it's going to put a lot of pressures on some of those entry-level roles and people who are coming into the workforce that are not as kind of qualified, making things happen. And I think you're also going to see opportunities for businesses to scale and grow quicker, because using global talent and using that US dollar arbitrage allows you to hire more, higher quality, right? Hire faster to provide more support. So I think business owners need to be kind of really looking at how they're approaching things. I think people that are kind of coming into the workforce and looking at their skill sets that are already in there need to really think twice about making sure that they're providing value and kind of reevaluating, do I just want to hide behind my computer at home? And, so I think it's gonna be a really interesting shift in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think so too. As we close, what is one small step that someone can do today that's going to help them change their tomorrow?
I think it's sitting down and writing out like where they want to be in 5 or 10 years, understanding truly what motivates them, right? Like what would make you happy, like vision board it out. In 10 years, I would love if I was owning my own business, being able to go to all my kids' sports games, like take my kids to school. And then I kind of back into what does it take to get there? Simple as that.
Small steps to big wins.
That's right.
What's on your vision board, Mike?
I've got
Pick one.
I don't necessarily have that vision board, ironically enough, right? But we are so focused on growing Nexus Point right now. So scaling it, adding as many resources as we can, and then kind of turning it into a little bit of a private equity arm, kind of leveraging our own assets to kind of drive value to other businesses and add more to the bottom line. So that's
nice.
Laser focused on that right now.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We're having fun with it.
Yeah, it's great when you're growing and you're having fun at the same time. That is the beauty of being an entrepreneur, isn't it?
I love Mondays. I look forward to Mondays. I seriously do. I can't wait for them.
So. Yeah, that's awesome. Even if it's challenging. And that's the other thing. And, we didn't go there, but entrepreneurship, whether you have a partner or not, is hard.
Oh, yeah.
There's no question it's hard. But if you love what you do, it's not
the buck stops with you, right? So you most people aren't in a situation where they don't have someone that they can't like swim upstream to, right? When you own a business, you are making that final decision, and it's either the right decision or the wrong decision. So that high pressure environment's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I thrive on
it. That's great. Well, Mike, thanks for the gift of your time. How can people reach out to you and find you?
You can find me on my website, nexuspt.io. You can shoot me an email, mike@nexuspt.io. And then I'm on all the socials, LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out. Love to hear from you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Sue. Great to be here. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I value your time with me, and I seek to make every moment count. In order to make lasting change in your life, listening is usually not enough. So I want to ask you, what practical steps are you going to put into action today as a result of listening to this podcast? Remember, any step, any action, no matter how small, starts your journey to a big win. And if you're not sure where to get started, reach out to me and let's have a conversation. Until next time, love yourself, then love others. Peace.